My husband took both my hands in the bridal suite, looked at me like he was about to tell me someone had died, and said, "Baby, before we walk into that reception, they aren't here." And just like that, on the most beautiful day of my entire life, the floor dropped out from underneath me, because the person I called my best friend for 20 years had decided I wasn't worth showing up for. Let me back up, because you can't understand how deep that knife went unless you understand how long the blade had been resting against my heart. I'm 29. The woman I'm going to call Camille is also 29. We met when we were 9 years old, two gap-toothed little girls assigned to the same reading group, and from that first afternoon we were inseparable. She was the first person who ever felt like home to me. Before I understood what loyalty was, I understood Camille. She was my first sleepover, my first secret keeper, the first phone number I memorized that wasn't my own mother's. When I think about my childhood, I don't think about it in years. I think about it in afternoons spent on the floor of her bedroom, the two of us trading dreams like baseball cards. Here's the thing I need you to know, because it matters for everything that comes later. Camille was always a little bit flaky. I knew that. I knew it the way you know your favorite sweater has a loose thread. It's just part of the thing you love. When we were kids, her mom used to call the other mothers and cancel playdates with these elaborate little lies. "Oh, Camille's feeling under the weather. She can't come over today." And then I'd find out later that Camille just hadn't felt like going. She wasn't sick. She just didn't want to, and her mother had learned to dress up, "I don't feel like it," in the costume of, "I can't." I told myself that was a childhood thing. People grow out of childhood things. I really believed that, but she didn't grow out of it. As an adult, Camille was the queen of the last-minute cancellation. We'd make plans 2 weeks out, dinner, a movie, a weekend trip, and an hour before, my phone would buzz. "I'm so sorry, I just can't tonight." Every time. It became a running joke between me and my sister, who I'll call Nora. Is Camille actually coming? Or is this a Camille maybe? And I'd defend her. I always defended her. Because for the big things, the graduations, the funerals, the moments that really counted, she usually showed up. She'd glide in at the last second, looking a little tired, and I'd feel so grateful that she'd come at all that I'd forgive the 10 times she hadn't. I should also tell you that Camille has some chronic health issues. And I want to be so clear about this, because I refuse to be the villain in my own story over a sick person. I have never, not once in 20 years, made her feel guilty for canceling because of her health. When she was genuinely unwell, I drove to her apartment with soup and sat on the edge of her bed and held the trash can while she cried. I am not the kind of person who rolls her eyes at illness. I know what real suffering looks like, and I have always given her the benefit of the doubt. But after 2 decades, you start to learn the difference between a person who is sick and a person who has learned that being sick is a door she can walk through anytime she wants to avoid something. The illness was real. The way she used it was the part that broke my trust. Slowly, like water wearing down stone. She used to tell me, with this earnest look in her eyes, "I will be there for your wedding even if I'm in a hospital bed." And the dramatic irony of that, which I'll get to, is that she has never once actually been hospitalized for her conditions. Not once. "Even if I'm in a hospital bed," was a beautiful, theatrical promise from a woman who had never seen the inside of one for the things she claimed would keep her down. I didn't catch the performance in it at the time. I just heard the love in it. I heard my best friend saying she'd crawl across broken glass for me. That's what I wanted to hear, so that's what I heard. When my now husband, I'll call him Ethan, proposed in June of 2024, Camille was one of the first people I called. I was crying so hard I could barely form words, and she screamed on the other end of the line, and for a moment it was like we were 9 again, sharing the biggest news of our lives. There was never a question in my mind about asking her to be a bridesmaid. She was my first home. How could the most important day of my life not include her standing beside me? So I asked her, and she said yes, and she cried, and I thought naively, I see that now, that this was going to be one of the great chapters of our friendship, the kind we'd tell our kids about someday. I knew our financial situations were different. I want to be the kind of person who plans around that instead of pretending it doesn't exist, so I did. I chose bridesmaid dresses specifically in a price range she could afford, and I checked the cost 3 times before I ever sent her the link. Ethan and I covered the hair, the makeup, the flowers, everything that could possibly be a burden. I lifted off her shoulders before she ever had to feel its weight. I didn't do it so she'd owe me anything. I did it because that's what you do for the people you love. You make the path smooth so all they have to do is walk it with you. Even my bachelorette weekend, I built the whole thing around her. I picked somewhere local, an easy drive, nothing that required a flight or a long trek through an airport. I planned activities that didn't involve a lot of standing or walking, because I wanted her to actually be able to enjoy herself instead of pushing through pain. I was going to surprise her with the choice of her own hotel room or bunking with me, whichever made her most comfortable. My bridal party was tiny and gentle on purpose. Just me, my sister Nora, Camille, and one other friend I'll call Priya. All quiet, kind, low-key women. No wild chaos. No pressure. The softest possible version of a celebration, designed like a nest, just for her. She told me she wasn't coming to the bachelorette before I even got the chance to surprise her with the room. Just a text. She wasn't going to make it. And I swallowed it, the way I'd swallowed 100 cancellations before, and I told myself, it's a lot. She's not super social, it's fine. I genuinely meant it. I wasn't keeping score. If you'd asked me that day whether I was angry, I would have told you no, and I would have been telling the truth. I had spent 20 years building a friendship that ran on forgiveness, and I had plenty left in the tank. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have started to see the pattern for what it was, or would you have kept giving her the benefit of the doubt the way I did? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to know if I was a fool or just a good friend. 18 days. That's how far out from my wedding we were when the text came. 18 days. I remember staring at my phone in the kitchen, the kettle going behind me, reading it 3 times before the words actually landed. Camille could no longer be a bridesmaid. Her health, she said. She couldn't stand or move for long periods. And I sat down slowly at the kitchen table because here's the thing she didn't know, or maybe didn't remember, or maybe just didn't think about. Nobody was going to be standing at the altar. Not one person. Ethan and I had made the deliberate choice to have our entire bridal party seated through the ceremony. There was no standing. There was no marathon of physical endurance. The entire ask, the whole job was this. Show up, sit in a chair to get your hair and makeup done, and walk down an aisle. Walk down an aisle. That was it. That was the mountain she said she couldn't climb. I didn't fire back. I didn't argue. I called Nora and I cried. And she said the thing she'd been gently saying for years, the thing a lot of people in my life had said. She's not a good friend. She has never been a good friend. You just can't see it because you love her. And I defended Camille even then, even with my face wet and the wedding bearing down on me like a train. She's sick, I said. It's not her fault. Nora went quiet on the other end of the line in that way she has, the silence that means she loves me too much to say what she's really thinking. And then there was the money. With her dropping out 18 days before the wedding, every deposit I'd paid for her evaporated. The hair appointment gone. The makeup slot gone. Her flowers already ordered, already part of the count, gone. Her seat at the rehearsal dinner, paid for, reserved, a place setting with her name on it, gone. I don't say this to be petty about the dollars, though it was real money I'll never get back. I say it because every single one of those losses was a little artifact of how much I'd planned for her. How much of my own day I'd shaped around making sure she was comfortable and included. Each cancellation deposit was a tiny tombstone for a piece of love I'd put out into the world and gotten nothing back for. But even then, I didn't slam the door. Because a few days later, Camille texted to ask if she, her mother, and her boyfriend could still come to the wedding as guests. And do you know what I said? I said, of course, immediately, without hesitation, because I loved her, and I loved her mother, I'll call her Diane, like a second mom. Diane had been a fixture of my childhood, a woman who fed me at her table and bandaged my scraped knees and, on one occasion I will never forget, genuinely saved my life when I was a kid in a way I won't detail here but have never stopped being grateful for. The thought of my wedding day without the two of them in the room felt unimaginable. So I said yes, come as guests, just be there, just be in the building when I marry the love of my life. That's all I want. Now I have to take you to the morning of the wedding, because this is where the story turns from a sad disappointment into something that genuinely rearranged the furniture in my soul. It was October of 2025. The light that morning was that perfect autumn gold, the kind that makes everything look like a memory while it's still happening. I woke up in the bridal suite with my sister and Priya, and there were mimosas and a robe with bride embroidered on the back, and somebody was playing music, and I felt like my chest was full of helium. I was getting married. After everything, after a lifetime of waiting, I was going to marry Ethan in a matter of hours. At 12:30 that afternoon, just as I was about to lower myself into the makeup chair, my phone lit up. It was Diane, Camille's mother, my second mother, and the text was not what you send to a daughter on her wedding day. It was a hedge, a cushioning. She wrote, in essence, that they would be there, but not for very long because Camille was sick. I read it standing up, with a makeup artist waiting for me and a curling iron heating up behind me, and I felt something cold move through me. Not the text itself, the timing of it. The careful, preemptive lowering of expectations, delivered at the exact moment I had the least capacity to absorb it. I didn't reply, couldn't. I was about to sit down and become a bride, and I made the decision, half-consciously, to let it go until later, to not let it touch the day. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We post new stories like this one every single day, and I promise the way this one ends is something you'll be thinking about long after it's over. Now let me tell you about the wedding itself, because before the heartbreak, there was the most perfect afternoon of my entire life. The ceremony was a fairy tale. I'm not exaggerating and I'm not romanticizing it through the fog of memory. It was genuinely, breathtakingly perfect. I walked down that aisle toward Ethan and I watched his face crumple, watched the strong, steady man I love completely fall apart at the sight of me, and every step felt like it was made of light. The vows we'd written wrecked us both. There was laughter in the wrong places and tears in the right ones. When the officiant told Ethan he could kiss me, our whole gathering erupted, and I remember thinking with total clarity, this is the happiest I have ever been or will ever be. I meant it. I was wrapped in love, surrounded by the people who'd chosen, again and again, to show up for me. I wasn't thinking about Camille at all. For one shining hour, she didn't exist. Ethan and I slipped back into the little bridal suite after the ceremony to catch our breath before the reception. This is a tradition some couples do. Just a few stolen minutes alone, married now, the two of us, before the party swallows us whole. We were giddy. We were laughing about something that had happened during the vows. I was riding the highest high of my life, my new husband's hand in mine. My wedding dress pooled around me on the little velvet couch, and I watched Ethan's face change. I watched him decide something. He's the kind of man who would carry a burden across a desert before he'd let me feel its weight, and I could see him wrestling with whether to tell me now, in private, or let me discover it in front of everyone at the reception. He chose to protect me. He took my hands, and he looked at me with so much tenderness it almost hurt, and he said the words I told you at the very beginning. Baby, before we walk in there, they aren't here. And I knew immediately who they was. I didn't have to ask. My heart, which had been so impossibly full 30 seconds earlier, just broke. Cleanly, like a plate dropped on tile. Camille hadn't come. Diane hadn't come. Not for the ceremony. Not for a little while. Not at all. The careful 12:30 text hadn't been a warning that they'd be brief. It had been the setup for a complete and total no-show, delivered in advance so that technically nobody could say they hadn't given me a heads up. Let me try to explain what that did to me, because sad isn't a big enough word. The woman I had called my best friend for 20 years, my first home, the person who knew the 9-year-old version of me, had decided that walking into a building and sitting in a chair for 1 hour was more than she could give me on the single most important day of my life. And her mother, a woman I had loved like my own blood, a woman who had once literally saved my life, had stood with her and made the same choice. 2 no-shows, mother and daughter, on my wedding day. It felt like being orphaned by people who were still alive. It felt like a death where the person keeps breathing and just decides, quietly, that you're not worth the trip. I didn't let it ruin the reception. I want you to know that. I dried my eyes and Ethan kissed my forehead, and we walked into that room hand in hand and we danced and we laughed and we ate cake and I threw the bouquet and we sent our guests home hoarse and happy. I refused to let Camille's absence steal the joy that everyone who did show up had worked so hard to give me. But there was a hairline fracture running through the whole night now, a crack in the glass that only I could see. Every time I scanned the room, and I caught myself doing it again and again, some animal part of me still looking for her face in the crowd. The crack widened. She wasn't there. She was never going to be there. And some part of me already understood that this wasn't a wound that was going to close. Here's the part that, 6 months later, still keeps me up at night. After the wedding, nothing. Silence. No text the next morning saying, "I'm so sorry I missed it." No card. No flowers. No congratulations on getting married. No, "I feel terrible. Can we talk?" No acknowledgement of any kind that she had no-showed the wedding of the person who'd loved her for 2 decades. It has been a little over 6 months now, and the silence has been total. She didn't just fail to show up. She failed to show up and then acted as though nothing had happened. As though there were nothing to apologize for, nothing to explain, nothing even worth a single sentence. The absence after the absence. That's the part that taught me who she really was. I have spent a lot of nights trying to understand it. Because here's what makes it so much worse than a simple. She got sick and couldn't make it. If she had texted me the next day, even a clumsy, half-hearted apology, I would have forgiven her. I would have. I'm the woman who covered her makeup deposit and built a bachelorette party around her comfort and said, of course, when she asked to come as a guest after dropping out as a bridesmaid. My forgiveness was practically a reflex. All she had to do was reach for it. And she didn't. She didn't reach for it because she didn't think she needed it. In her mind, apparently, there was nothing to be forgiven. And then, a few months ago, the knife twisted one final time, in a way so small and so specific that it almost made me laugh through the grief. I remembered that Camille kept this little anonymous social media account, a kind of alter ego profile where she'd post fan art under a name nobody who knew her would recognize. It was her quiet creative outlet, and I'd always thought it was sweet that she had this whole secret artistic life. So one night, unable to sleep, I went and I looked at it, and there, posted on the exact date of my wedding, the day she was supposedly too sick to walk down an aisle and sit in a chair, was a brand new piece of art. She'd been well enough to create, well enough to sit and draw and edit and post and engage with her little online audience. She just hadn't been well enough to come to my wedding. That timestamp told me everything that 20 years of friendship had refused to. So that's where I've been living for the past 6 months. In the strange, hollow aftermath of a friendship breakup that nobody throws you a casserole for. Because that's the thing nobody warns you about. When a romantic relationship ends, the world has a script for it. People bring wine. They say, you'll find someone better. They understand. But when a 20-year friendship dies, especially when it dies not with a fight but with a silence, there's no script. There's no closure. There's just this hole in the middle of your chest where a person used to be, and the constant, maddening impulse to text them, followed immediately by the memory of why you can't. I won't lie to you about how hard the missing has been. I miss her all the time, at the most ridiculous moments. There was a reunion special for a show we'd both loved as kids that got announced a little while ago, and I sat on my couch and cried, not because of the show, but because my first instinct, before I could stop it, was to grab my phone and text Camille. Can you believe this? The way I had 1,000 times before. And then the cold water of reality. Right? We don't do that anymore. She no-showed my wedding and then drew fan art on the same day and never said a word. And I'm not allowed to text her about a TV reunion like everything's fine. Grief is so stupid. It doesn't care what the person did. It just misses them. Here's what I keep circling back to, what I think is actually the lesson buried in all this. For 20 years, I mistook my own loyalty for the health of the friendship. I thought because I kept showing up, kept forgiving, kept smoothing the path, that the friendship itself was strong. But a friendship isn't strong just because one person refuses to let it die. A bridge held up by a single pillar isn't a bridge, it's a slow-motion collapse. Everyone in my life had been telling me this for years, and I'd called it cynicism, called them harsh, defended her against all of them. And it turned out they were just standing far enough back to see the whole structure, while I was too close, holding up my end, convinced the weight I felt was love instead of a warning. If you've been listening this far, drop a comment below and tell me honestly, do you think I made the right call by letting the silence stand? By not chasing her down to demand an apology she clearly was never going to give? Because there's a part of me that still wonders if I should have sent one final message. And there's a bigger part of me that knows the silence was her answer, and that begging for a goodbye would have just been me holding up that broken bridge one last time. I've thought a lot about Diane too, because in some ways her absence cut deeper than Camille's. Camille had been teaching me, slowly, for 2 decades, who she was. I just refused to take the lesson. But Diane was different. Diane was the steady one. Diane was the mother who showed up when my own family was going through hard things, the woman whose kitchen smelled like safety. For her to stand beside her daughter and make the same choice, to not even come for the hour, to not send her own card afterward, that one I genuinely did not see coming. And I've made my peace, mostly, with the idea that a mother will follow her child even into a decision that's wrong. She chose Camille. Of course she chose Camille. I can't even really blame her for that. But it doesn't make the empty chairs hurt any less. What I've started to understand in the long quiet months since is that some people are not capable of giving you what you would give them, and it has nothing to do with how much they love you. I think Camille did love me in her way. I don't think she sat there and gleefully decided to wound me. I think she's a person who has spent her whole life learning that her own comfort comes first and that there will always be someone, me, her mother, somebody, willing to absorb the cost of that. She didn't no-show my wedding because she hated me. She no-showed it because somewhere deep down she knew I'd forgive her, the way I always had, and she was right that the old me would have. She just didn't count on this being the thing that finally taught me to stop. So how do you move on? That's the question I've been asking everyone, the question I've turned over 1,000 times at 2 in the morning. And the answer I've slowly arrived at isn't a clean one. You don't move on the way you'd flip a switch. You move on the way the tide goes out. Slowly, in increments so small you can't feel them, until one day you look up and realize the water's farther from you than it used to be. The first month, I thought about her every single hour. Now it's most days, but not all of them. I'd be lying if I said the hole in my chest had closed. It hasn't. But it started to scar over, and scar tissue, I've learned, is just the body's way of saying this happened and I survived it. I've been pouring that love somewhere new, too. Into Ethan, who held my hands in that bridal suite and chose to break my heart gently rather than let me find out in front of a room full of people. That man has shown me more about what it means to show up than Camille did in 20 years. Into my sister Nora, who never once said, "I told you so," even though she'd more than earned the right. Into Priya, who stood beside me at the altar and didn't need to be talked into it. Didn't need a discounted dress and a comfort-designed bachelorette to decide I was worth her time. I'm learning, late but finally, to notice the people who show up without being asked twice, and to stop romanticizing the ones who treat my biggest moments like an inconvenience they can RSVP no to from the comfort of their own creative hobby. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes from an empty chair at your wedding. For years, the question in my head had always been, how do I keep Camille in my life? The wedding flipped it. The new question became, why was I working so hard to keep someone who wouldn't cross a parking lot for me? And once you ask that question, you can't unask it. The whole 20-year structure reorganized itself in my memory. All those cancellations stopped looking like quirks and started looking like data. All those big moments she usually showed up for. I started remembering how many she'd actually slid in late to, or left early from, or attended like she was doing me a favor. The wedding didn't reveal a new Camille. It revealed the Camille who'd been there the whole time, the one everyone else could see and I couldn't. If you've ever had a friendship end this way, not with an explosion but with a slow leak and then a silence, then you know that the cruelest part is the lack of a body to bury. There's no fight to point to, no single betrayal you can hold up and say, this is why. There's just an accumulation and then an absence, and then the slow dawning realization that the person was never going to fight for you the way you fought for them. And you have to learn to grieve someone who is still out there, living their life, posting their art, completely unbothered by the wreckage they walked away from. That's a specific kind of heartbreak, and if you're carrying it right now, I want you to know you're not crazy and you're not dramatic. Losing a best friend can hurt every bit as much as losing a partner. Sometimes more because you never thought it could end. I keep coming back to that promise she made me years before any of this. I'll be there even if I'm in a hospital bed. I used to hear those words as the deepest kind of devotion. Now I hear them for what they were. A beautiful piece of theater from someone who had never been in a hospital bed in her life and never intended to test the promise. The grand declaration was always easy for Camille. It was the small, unglamorous follow-through. The showing up, the sitting in the chair, the walking down the aisle, that she could never actually do. And I think that's the truest thing I can tell you about people. Don't listen to the size of what they promise. Watch the size of what they show up for. The two are almost never the same, and the gap between them is exactly the shape of how much they actually love you. I'm okay now. Mostly. Genuinely. I have a husband who would set the world on fire before he'd let me feel small. A sister who loves me with her whole stubborn heart. And a friend in Priya who taught me what an effortless yes looks like. My wedding was still the best day of my life. I won't let Camille have that. Won't let her absence become the headline of a day that was overflowing with people who chose me. The empty chairs were real, but so were all the full ones, and there were so many more full ones. That's the thing I have to keep reminding myself of when the grief sneaks up. She didn't show, but a whole room of people did. I spent 20 years staring at the one door that wouldn't open and missing the dozens that were standing wide. If there's a moral here, it's this. Be careful where you spend your loyalty, because loyalty is the one currency that doesn't come back when you overspend it on the wrong person. For 2 decades, I poured mine into someone who treated it as bottomless, and the wedding was simply the day the account finally hit zero. I don't regret loving her. You can't regret love, not really. It made me who I am. But I've stopped mistaking my own capacity to forgive for evidence that someone deserves to be forgiven. Some people will take every drop of grace you offer and never once think to pour any back. And the hardest, most freeing lesson of my entire life has been learning to walk away from the empty chair, turn back toward the full room, and finally let myself be loved by the people who actually showed up. Hey everyone, we're working toward 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Every one of you brings us closer. Thanks so much.